There is a mathematical pattern in history that is more reliable than gravity. It is the sequence that has destroyed every single global reserve currency in the last 600 years. Not most of them. Every single one. We are taught in school to believe that great empires fall because of war, or barbarian invasions, or simply bad luck. That is a comforting lie. Empires collapse because of their currency. They collapse because the mathematics of power eventually turns against them. The Portuguese real dominated the known world for 80 years, then vanished into irrelevance. The Dutch guilder ruled the oceans for 80 years, then collapsed into nothingness. The British pound sterling reigned supreme for 105 years, then died a slow, agonizing death that reduced a global superpower to a small island nation. Each of these currencies followed the exact same 7-stage cycle. Each empire believed they were the exception to the rule. Each elite class thought their wealth was permanent. And every single one of them was wrong. The United States dollar was crowned the world's reserve currency in 1944. That was 81 years ago. Right now, in 2025, the dollar is officially deep in stage 5 of this same 7-stage death cycle. This is not a conspiracy theory found on the fringes of the internet. This is not a partisan political talking point. This is an economic algorithm that has played out 4 times across 6 centuries with terrifying precision. We are simply watching the 5th iteration of the code. The only question that matters right now is not will it happen. The question is, are you smart enough to see the pattern before it completes, or are you arrogant enough to believe that this time is different? In this dossier, I am going to declassify the pattern. I will walk you through the 7 stages that every reserve currency goes through, and show you exactly why the timeline of the dollar suggests we are closer to the end than the beginning. To understand how a currency dies, you must first understand how it is born. A reserve currency is never chosen by a global popularity contest. It is not selected by a committee of economists sitting in a boardroom. It is established by force. Stage 1 of the cycle always begins with the same brutal reality, which is military dominance over global trade routes. It is not enough to simply have a strong army to defend your borders. To own the world's money, you must own the physical pathways where the world's commerce flows. You must control the choke points. Let us look at the historical evidence. In the 1450s, Portugal did not become a superpower through diplomacy. They mastered oceanic navigation before anyone else, but they did not just sail the waters. They militarized them. They rounded the Cape of Good Hope and built armed fortresses at strategic choke points like Goa in India, Malacca in Southeast Asia, and Mozambique in Africa. These were not just trading posts, they were gatekeepers. If you were a merchant and you wanted spices from the east, you dealt with Portugal. You paid in Portuguese reals. The currency became the global standard, not because it was backed by gold, but because it was backed by cannons. The Dutch followed the exact same blueprint in the 1600s. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, was not a normal corporation. It was a sovereign military power. At its peak, this single company commanded 40 warships and an army of 20,000 soldiers. They violently seized control of the Spice Islands from the Portuguese. They enforced a simple monopoly. If you wanted to trade in the Dutch-controlled waters, you needed guilders. The demand for the currency was manufactured by the barrel of a gun. By the 1800s, Britain perfected this model. The Royal Navy possessed more warships than the next 5 nations combined. They controlled every critical maritime artery, from Gibraltar to Suez, from Singapore to Hong Kong. The pound sterling became as good as gold because British naval power made international trade physically impossible without it. Which brings us to the United States. The dollar achieved stage 1 in 1945. Today, the US Navy dominates every ocean, with 11 aircraft carrier strike groups, which is more than the rest of the world combined. Look at the map. The US military controls or has bases near every major trade choke point on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz, where the oil flows. The Strait of Malacca, where Asian trade flows. The Panama Canal. The Suez. This is what economists politely call exorbitant privilege. But let us call it what it really is, the imperial rent, because the US protects and controls global trade. Every other nation is forced to use the US dollar to buy oil, to settle debts, and to trade with neighbors. This allows the US to print paper money and export it in exchange for real goods like cars, electronics, and raw materials. This military dominance creates the illusion of invincibility. It makes the currency feel permanent, but history shows that military power is just the foundation. Once the guns secure the wealth, the rot begins from within. Once you control the oceans, you enter stage 2, which is defined by massive trade surpluses. This is the golden age. The empire becomes a production machine. It sells finished goods to the world and sucks in real wealth, specifically gold and silver, in return. In the 1600s, Amsterdam became the warehouse of the world. In the 1800s, Britain became the workshop of the world, and from 1945 to 1970, America was the undisputed factory of the earth. Europe was in ruins. Asia was rebuilding. America exported steel, cars, and machinery, and the world paid in gold. By the 1950s, Fort Knox held over 20,000 tons of gold, nearly 70% of all the monetary gold on the planet. This was a time when a single income could support a family, buy a home, and save for the future. The currency was strong because the nation was productive, but this immense wealth creates a psychological trap. It breeds a cultural complacency known as the psychology of decline. The nation begins to believe its own hype. The citizens become comfortable. The politicians become complacent. They start to believe that the money flows in because they are special, not because they are productive. A subtle shift occurs in the national character. Hard work and thrift, the virtues that built the empire, are replaced by speculation and entitlement. We stop celebrating the engineer and the farmer, and we start celebrating the banker and the celebrity. This cultural rot is the invisible symptom of stage 2. It is the moment when the empire begins to die spiritually, long before it dies financially. This leads to stage 3, the formalization. This is the tipping point. The world officially formalizes the empire's dominance through treaties. For the US, this was the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. It looks like the ultimate victory. It looks like the empire has won the game of Monopoly. But hidden inside this agreement was a mathematical cancer known as the Triffin dilemma. Here's the trap. To function as the global reserve currency, the US must provide enough dollars for the world to use for trade. To get those dollars out to the world, the US must run trade deficits. It must buy more than it sells. You cannot be the world's reserve currency and maintain a trade surplus forever. It is mathematically impossible. The moment you sign the treaty to become the global standard, you sign the death warrant of your manufacturing base. It acts like a slow-acting poison. Initially, it feels like power, but year after year, it hollows out the industrial core of the nation, shipping factories and jobs overseas to satisfy the global demand for dollar liquidity. This triggers stage 4, the reversal. The empire stops producing and starts consuming. It stops being a maker and becomes a taker. We saw this in Holland in the 1700s. The Dutch got rich and lazy. They shifted from shipping and manufacturing to banking and financial speculation. They lived off the interest of their paste. We saw it in Britain in the early 1900s. Their industrial base aged and rotted, while they imported cheaper goods from rising powers like Germany and America. The financial sector in London boomed while the factories in Manchester rusted. The United States entered stage 4 precisely on August 15, 1971. This is a date that should be burned into your memory, for it is the moment the modern world was truly born. President Richard Nixon went on television and announced the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. But why did he do this? We must look at the context of the 1960s. The United States was trying to fund the Great Society welfare programs at home while simultaneously fighting a massive, expensive war in Vietnam. Economists call this the guns and butter policy. You cannot pay for both a massive welfare state and a massive war machine without going bankrupt. The US Treasury was draining gold at an alarming rate. President Charles de Gaulle of France saw this happening. He called the US dollar an instrument of economic colonization. He sent the French Navy across the Atlantic to New York Harbor to physically redeem France's paper dollars for American gold. This triggered a run on the bank. Nixon had no choice. He closed the gold window to stop the bleeding. That temporary suspension is now 54 years old. Since that day, the U.S. trade surplus flipped into a permanent deficit. Today, the U.S. runs the largest trade deficit in human history, over $800 billion a year. We import your TVs, your clothes, your phones, and your cars. And we pay for them with a digital entry in a ledger. We are eating our seed corn. The productive capacity of the nation has been hollowed out and replaced by financialization. We celebrate the stock market hitting new highs, while the real economy crumbles beneath it. This separation of the financial economy from the real economy is the defining characteristic of stage 4. Wall Street booms while Main Street dies. The stock market becomes a measure of inflation, not a measure of economic health. This phase works for a while. It feels good. It feels like cheap goods at the store. It feels like endless credit. But when the deficit becomes too big to finance with normal borrowing, the government has only one option left, the option that marks the point of no return. When the deficits become unsustainable and the world refuses to lend enough money to cover the empire's lavish lifestyle, the government faces a binary choice. Option A is to default on the debt, declare national bankruptcy, and endure a massive depression. Option B is to debase the currency and print the difference. They always choose option B. This is stage 5, currency debasement. And make no mistake, this is exactly where we are right now. History provides the script. In the 1550s, the Portuguese crown began secretly shaving the edges off their silver coins and mixing base metals into the melt to pay for their sprawling empire. In ancient Rome, emperors diluted the silver content of the denarius to pay the legions, until the coin was essentially copper washed in silver, triggering the first hyperinflation in history. In the 1940s, Britain printed money to fund the welfare state and war debts, devaluing the pound repeatedly. But the United States has taken this to a level that defies all economic logic. The US officially entered Stage 5 during the 2008 financial crisis, printing $3.5 trillion in quantitative easing. We were told this was a one-time emergency measure to save the banking system. We were lied to. In 2020 and 2021, in just 24 months, the Federal Reserve printed nearly $7 trillion. 40% of all US dollars in existence were created in that short window. Let that sink in. Nearly half of the entire monetary history of the United States was created in 2 years. They call it stimulus. They call it quantitative easing. The dossier calls it theft. Because when you print trillions of new dollars, you are not creating value. You are diluting the value of every existing dollar in your savings account. The inflation you experienced in 2022 was not caused by foreign dictators or supply chains. Those were convenient excuses. Inflation is a mathematical consequence of increasing the money supply without increasing production. It is a hidden tax. It transfers purchasing power from the working class, who hold cash and earn wages, to the asset class, who hold stocks and real estate. This phenomenon creates a dangerous psychological state known as the money illusion. You see the numbers in your retirement account going up, and you feel richer. But you are measuring your wealth with a ruler that is shrinking. The house that cost $100,000 20 years ago now costs $500,000. The house did not get 5 times better. The money got 5 times worse. You are being sedated by nominal gains while suffering real losses. We must look at the specific historical precedent of the Weimar Republic in 1923. It did not start with hyperinflation. It started with heavy debt and social spending. It started with the government. Yes, you are the people that the liquidity was temporary. Then, confidence snapped. In a matter of weeks, the German mark went from being a respected currency to being used as wallpaper. The middle class, who had followed the rules and saved in cash, were wiped out. The speculators who borrowed heavily to buy assets became the new masters. This is the moral hazard of Stage 5. It punishes the saver and rewards the debtor. This is known as the Cantillon effect. The people closest to the money printer, the banks, the government, the large corporations, get the money first. They use it to buy assets while prices are still low. By the time that money trickles down to your paycheck, prices have already risen. You are running on a treadmill that is speeding up. You work harder, but you buy less. But there is a critical difference this time. When Portugal or Britain debased their currency, the pain was mostly local, because the dollar is the global reserve. When the Fed prints, we export inflation to the entire world. We force other nations to eat our debt. We use our exorbitant privilege to make the developing world pay for our deficits. We weaponize the dollar, using sanctions to cut nations off from the global economy if they disagree with our policies. And that pushes the world toward the breaking point, the moment when the suckers at the table realize the game is rigged. This leads, inevitably, to Stage 6, the loss of confidence and the search for alternatives. This is the moment the world decides they have had enough. They start looking for the exit. It happens slowly at first, in the shadows, and then all at once. In the 1570s, international merchants stopped accepting Portuguese reals and demanded Spanish silver. In the 1780s, Europe abandoned the Dutch guilder for the British pound. In the 1950s, the world dumped the pound for the dollar. We are watching this happen to the dollar in real time. The signs are everywhere if you look past the mainstream news. To understand this, you must look at the foundation of the modern dollar, the petrodollar system. In 1974, following the gold default, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger struck a genius but temporary deal with Saudi Arabia. We promised military protection and weapons. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all oil sales exclusively in US dollars. This created a permanent, artificial demand for dollars. Every country needed dollars to buy energy. This allowed the US to run deficits without consequence, as the dollars we sent out for oil came right back to buy US Treasury bonds. It was a perfect loop. But that deal is essentially dead. Saudi Arabia recently began accepting Chinese yuan for oil. This breaks the 50-year precedent that underpinned the dollar's value. This is a geopolitical earthquake that the media is ignoring. Exhibit B is the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They are actively building a parallel financial system to bypass the SWIFT network and the dollar. They are not doing this because they hate America. They are doing this because they want to survive. They see the $35 trillion in U.S. debt. They see the interest payments on that debt consuming the entire U.S. tax revenue. And they are voting with their wallets. The weaponization of the SWIFT system against Russia in February 2022 was the final bell. When the U.S. and Europe froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, it sent a shockwave through Beijing, Riyadh, and Brasilia. The message was clear: if you hold dollars, your national savings are not safe. They can be confiscated if Washington disagrees with your foreign policy. That destroyed the concept of a neutral reserve asset. Once the trust is broken, it cannot be rebuilt. Exhibit C is gold. Central banks are buying more gold now than at any time since 1967. There is another signal, hidden in the footnotes of central bank reports that confirm this timeline. It is the Great Repatriation. For decades, nations left their gold in vaults in New York and London for safekeeping. But in the last few years, countries like Germany, Poland, and Turkey have quietly demanded their gold be shipped back home. Why? Because they no longer trust the custodians of the dollar system. They want the physical metal within their own borders. Possession is 9/10 of the law, especially when the law is about to break. Ask yourself, why are China and Russia dumping US Treasury bonds and hoarding thousands of tons of physical gold? They know Stage 7 is coming. Gold cannot be printed. It cannot be sanctioned. It cannot be debased by a politician in Washington. It is the only asset that has survived every currency collapse in human history. But here's the part of the dossier that should truly terrify you. This is the difference that makes our situation unique. Every previous reserve currency collapse was regional. When the guilder fell, it devastated Amsterdam, but the world moved on. When the pound fell, it hurt the British Empire. The US dollar is different. It is global. It is the operating system of the entire planet. There is over $70 trillion in dollar-denominated debt held outside the United States. This is known as the Eurodollar market, a massive, unregulated ocean of dollar liabilities. If the dollar loses its reserve status, this is not just a recession, it is a restructuring of the entire global financial order. The collapse of the dollar triggers defaults across every continent. Emerging markets that borrowed in dollars will not be able to pay. Global supply chains will freeze. Pensions will evaporate. This means the transition to Stage 7 will be chaotic, volatile, and destructive to existing wealth. It will not be a smooth handoff. It will be a crisis. And in a crisis, wealth does not disappear. It transfers. It transfers from those who hold the dying currency to those who hold real assets. This transfer will be the largest redistribution of wealth in human history. It will wipe out the middle class who save in paper money, and it will enrich the few who understood the cycle and prepared for it. Furthermore, we must be vigilant about the solution the system will propose. As the dollar collapses, central banks will not simply return to a gold standard because gold limits their power to spend. Instead, they are preparing the ultimate trap, central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. They will present this as a modern, convenient solution to the crisis they created. But do not be fooled. A CBDC is not money, it is a surveillance tool. It is programmable currency that allows the state to monitor every transaction, limit what you can buy, and even set expiration dates on your savings. This is the dystopian version of Stage 7, a shift from a dying fiat currency to a total control grid. The only way to opt out of this digital panopticon is to hold assets that exist outside the digital system. Assets that are tangible, private, and historically proven. So, what do? First, you must kill the urge to panic. Panic is for the uninformed. The smart money, the families that preserve wealth across generations, do not panic. They position themselves. You need to understand that in Stage 6, holding 100% of your wealth in dollars or dollar-denominated bonds is not safe. It is a risk. It is gambling that the mathematical pattern of 600 years will suddenly stop just for you. The goal is not to abandon the dollar entirely, as you still need it to live. The goal is to diversify out of pure dollar exposure. History gives us the blueprint. When the Portuguese rail collapsed, the smart merchants had already traded their rails for Spanish silver. When the Dutch guilder failed, the bankers in Amsterdam had already moved their capital to London real estate. And when the British pound collapsed, the elite had already shifted into US dollars and industrial assets. They all followed the same principle. Hold assets that maintain value regardless of the currency denomination. Real estate, productive businesses with cash flow, commodities like energy, and, of course, physical gold. These are hard assets. They cannot be printed by a central bank. If the dollar loses 50% of its value tomorrow, a farm is still a farm. An ounce of gold is still an ounce of gold. The price in dollars just changes to reflect the devaluation. Do not wait for the government to fix this. Breaking the pattern would require the US to stop printing money, slash spending, and run a budget surplus. That would cause immediate, severe economic pain. And in a democracy, no one votes for pain. They vote for stimulus. They vote for the printing press. So the pattern will continue. Stage 6 will accelerate into Stage 7. The reserve currency death cycle is not a conspiracy theory. It is a historical reality documented across 6 centuries, 7 stages, 4 empires, and now a 5th. The Portuguese real lasted 80 years. The Dutch guerre lasted 80 years. The British pound lasted 105 years. The US dollar has lasted 81 years and counting. We are sitting at the mathematical average lifespan of a reserve currency, exhibiting every single symptom of terminal decline, deficits, debasement, and a loss of global confidence. This is how currencies die. Not with an invasion, not with a sudden catastrophe, but with mathematics. It happens slowly, so you get used to it. Then it happens fast, so you cannot escape it. By the time the news anchors admit Stage 7 has arrived, the transfer of wealth will already be complete. The only question left is simple. Will you recognize the pattern before it completes? Or will you be the liquidity that transfers wealth to those who did?
Messieurs, voici les dollars. Nous exigeons notre dû. Convertissez-les en or, maintenant.